So hello everyone, welcome. Again, just a quick introduction. I'm Nicole Coomber and I'm the Assistant Director for the Quest Honors Program, which is an undergrad program for business and engineering students that does consulting projects like the ones that you guys do. And I also taught last semester with Melissa Carrier a workshop, well, a class actually that had some similar components to this. So last week we talked about project scoping. Have you guys gotten a chance to do a statement of work? Anyone there yet? No, still in the process. Okay, that's fine, because in some ways, you know, looking at how you're going to plan out the rest of your project is probably helpful in determining what your statement of work needs to say. So I'm going to go over quickly what we did last week just as a recap, and then see if you have any questions about that, and then we'll go into project management. And the idea is that this is, normally what I do is run a little bit more of a workshop, but since most of the folks are kind of watching from home on this, the idea is that I'll give you the tools to then run through this with your teams so that you can take this PowerPoint, kind of go through step by step, and then come up with your tasks that you need to do, the kind of timeline for them, and then hopefully come up with a Gantt chart, which is usually pretty helpful. So just a quick recap of what we did last week. We talked about creating the project scope. First off, starting with a really strong team, talking about team charters, talking about team differences. Has anyone gotten a chance to put together a team charter at all yet? Maybe thought about it? No. It's fine. It is very helpful, so I would suggest that you do it and talk about some of your, the things that you're all there to do. It's really a good idea to help get your team started. So creating the team charter, having that visioning. Anyone have a visioning meeting yet with their client? Yeah, you did? How did it go?
It was a little confusing.
Okay.
Because it wasn't, well, some of the ideas were different
than what you,
thought,
yeah.
what we would be doing and what they thought they want us to do. So
right.
It's going to be a challenge to kind of get people in that.
Okay. Well, that happens a lot actually with my students too. Like, we'll present a very brief kind of overview of the project, and they get with the client, and sometimes between the time the projects are scoped out for us, the folks that are bringing the projects in, and then this client gets to use, some things change within even their business. So that could be some of the reasons for it. It's also sometimes when you're sitting down face to face and people are asking you questions, you kind of realize things that maybe have changed. So don't, if you haven't got a chance to sit down with your client yet and have that initial meeting, that does happen pretty frequently. So you'll get there. So some suggested topics for initial meeting. We did a little bit of visioning. We talked about gap analysis and force field analysis to talk about sort of some of the things of assessing the current and ideal state. And also talking about some resources that you have or resources that you may need as you're going forth with your project. We talked about the statement of work, setting up that primary goal, and then three to five, but generally 3 is what's suggested, topics that will help you come up with what is actually expected of you and the client. When we talked a little bit about scope creep, which is when your scope sort of creeps along into a different space. We actually had a senior retreat Friday at Accenture. They also have something they call scope change, when the client basically says, I want you to replace this piece with that piece. Those are both things that you need to address. If there's a client suggests a change to scope, I want you to do something else for task 2. That also could be just a total change of scope. And that would be, you need to draw up a new statement of work for that too. We talked a little bit about that. If you have the client wants something different, kind of replacing out something that you're already doing, so that it's not expanding what you're supposed to do, but kind of keeping it the same amount of work, just replacing the goals and setting different priorities for it. So that's, there we go, just hit okay. So that's sort of what we did last week. Are there any questions about scoping that you guys had we wanted to follow up with? All right, so today we'll talk about project management. Any concerns y'all have about project management? Any thoughts? What does project management mean? I know there's like 5 of you here, I'm picking on you guys. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm addressing any concerns that you have, as you think about what you're worried about with your project.
How do you decide at the beginning of the project how much, you have a sense of how much time it'll take to hit different benchmarks, but how do you decide how to space those out?
Right.
And who owns what, or what's an appropriate, if you think that a lot of your work is going to be at one part of the project and not so much at the other, how do you make those decisions?
Okay, so the question is how do you make the decisions about what spacing, amount of time per task, and quite honestly, this is a little bit of trial and error. I think what you can do, some of the things that you can do is you can talk to your client about how long things have taken in the past. You know, has someone done a project like this for you before? How long did this piece of it take? You have resources. I mean, I'm always here as a resource. You can talk to me about, how, you know, hey, Nicole, I know your students that worked for the University of Baltimore. They did this particular piece, something similar. How long did that take them? So I would ask around, because you yourself may not have an idea of how much time some of this stuff takes. So I would definitely use the resources around you. And then, quite honestly, you may have to guess and then adjust. You may say, okay, I think this is going to take 3 weeks as long as everything falls into place. But then maybe somebody's supposed to respond to a survey and they, you don't get enough survey responses, so you have to add on a couple of weeks. The beauty of kind of putting together a Gantt chart is that if you have 3 weeks set up for something and then all of a sudden something happens and you need to sort of add time, you know how that's going to affect everything else in your project plan. So if you have 3 weeks and ends up taking 4, you know that, okay, you're not going to be able to get this piece of the project done until you have the survey done, so it's going to push everything back a week. So maybe we need to work over spring break. Or, well, I guess this isn't spring semester, but you know, we may need to kind of like over that Thanksgiving break, let's schedule a conference call so we can all, you know, the team can work on a particular piece. So you want to build in, I think, anything that you have going on in the semester, like Thanksgiving, like midterms, all that kind of stuff. I know for MBAs, you guys have, you know, short mini semesters, and so you may have exams at different times. So you may want to build that in, and then recognize some of those gap times are going to be useful when you come back to the project later. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the Gantt chart. Now this is like a huge slide deck, and my intent is that we're just going to touch on some things briefly, but I do encourage you to kind of go back and see which tools are going to fit with you the most important. So the most important part that I want to get to today is going to the Gantt chart and how I make them in Google Docs. There's other tools that you guys have available, like Microsoft Project. The reason I like Google Docs is because it's something that you can share. And I know a lot of people have some familiarity with them, and it's pretty easy to get started on it. There's like a whole YouTube video that's how I learned how to use it on Google Docs. So I think it's pretty easy to do, and it's something that the whole team can share and updates that you guys are keeping track. Okay, so goals for today. We're talking about brainstorming, decision making, affinity diagrams, tree charts, and Gantt charts. That's a lot for one day. However, I know that you guys have some familiarity with some of this. I mean, has anyone here not done some brainstorming at some point? No, okay. So we'll go very briefly over brainstorming. But I will show you kind of how to do it in this context, and we'll talk a little bit about ways to do it kind of in a new way. Because, you know, here's the rules for brainstorming, and the most important rule is that you don't sit there and judge other people's ideas. I'm the worst person ever for judging ideas. I mean, I even judge my own. I'll come up with an idea of like, no, that's not going to work, that's too expensive, or whatever. So the really important thing is, once you have your statement of work and you want to come up, okay, what do we need to do to get this project done? You want to try to just let it be a judgment-free zone as much as you can. There's a couple different ways to do that. You can do brainstorming in the really traditional way, or you can set it up a little more structured, a little more formalized, and that may get you out of that judgment zone, especially when you know that you have some decision-making tools you can use later on. So it's kind of letting things flow freely, having a little bit of fun with it. I mean, you know, if money were no object, how would you tackle this project? You may come up with some ideas that are useful if you kind of try to let go of those restraints. I know for my mentor class, we were practicing a little bit of brainstorming, just kind of having a little bit of fun with it, and they were coming up with ideas of where we would go on a mentor field trip. They came up with all sorts of ideas like space, Harry Potter land, Napa Valley, and I was like, okay, clearly we're not going to go on a field trip to any of those places. But at the end of the day, once we use the decision-making tools, we came up with whitewater rafting and the New York trip. And actually, I think we are going to go to New York next semester. So it's amazing how the more fun you have with it, you actually come up with some good ideas and build on each other's ideas. Because, okay, maybe we can't go to space, but maybe we can go to the planetarium. You know, maybe we can't do an entire benchmarking study for our client, but maybe there's a benchmarking study that's been done out there in the literature that we can use to help us inform our project. Yeah, any questions about that? No, probably not. Okay, so 2 types of brainstorming. And one that, when I do run this workshop, and I actually encourage you to try it, that I like to use is this idea of written brainstorming. And the way that we actually do is we use Post-its. So you kind of come up with that central question. So let's see. Usually using your statement of work is probably a good idea for this. Okay, this is our statement of work. Basically, the question is, what do we need to do to get this done? So that's your central question. And then you would set up a time limit, say 10 minutes, and just brainstorm individually all the different things that you think that you need to do this. Is it, and again, if it's survey all the students at the University of Baltimore that went through this admissions process, that's one suggestion. If it's talk to every faculty member, if it's go visit 10 other universities to see what their admissions processes are like, come up with anything and everything that you think might help. So brainstorming, you can also do this with a whiteboard, and setting a time limit and that kind of thing is another way to do it. But I like the written brainstorming because it gives you a chance to come up with ideas individually. And what's cool is that you may have 3 team members that are all coming up with similar ideas, and that way you kind of know that you're on the right track. So if you're doing it that way, then you probably want to set aside, okay, 5 minutes for individual brainstorming and then 5 minutes for us to build on each other's ideas. Let's all shout out, let's all tell each other ideas and then kind of build off of each other and maybe do a second round of brainstorming new tasks. So you kind of come up with this whole list of tasks. So we talked about this, deciding on the central question, setting a time limit. You may want to do multiple rounds. The reason I kind of made a little exercise is because I figured you can take these with your groups and use them to walk yourselves through the process. So if we'll kind of do a case study, I guess, here. This is my statement of work for this project I talked about last week, the University of Baltimore Graduate Admissions Process Improvement. They had their opportunity statement, which was to reduce the cycle time of the graduate admission process at the University of Baltimore in order to increase efficiency and shorten turnaround time of the application decisions. Okay, I didn't put all of that on the slide, but that was their opportunity that they looked at. And notice also that they're using opportunity rather than problem. That was an issue that came up with our students. One of them said, called their client's goal that they wanted to achieve a problem, and the client took offense at that. So you want to think about your language. So this is our statement of work. We want to identify current and, not the idea state, but the ideal state. Look for opportunities for improvement, and then identify the most substantive opportunities for improvement. It's kind of like a qualitative and a quantitative piece right there. The qualitative piece is, okay, where are some opportunities for improvement? That's task 1. Then quantifying them and figuring out where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. That was kind of task 3. And then the idea is, you make some recommendations, and the client would say, why don't you focus on recommendation 2? Okay, so if we want to achieve this, what do we need to do? Sit down with our Post-it notes. We're going to write out some tasks. Here was sort of my off-the-cuff brainstorming, and these are my Post-it notes. Interview current students, spend a day in the office, submit a dummy application, interview current faculty, measure time spent on tasks in process, map ideal process. These are all some different things that they thought of that they could do to get at kind of doing this goal. Here's some things. In an ideal world, these stuff isn't too crazy, but you could imagine saying, hey, we want to visit some other universities. We want to visit their competitor schools in Iowa and Kansas. So kind of coming up with all the steps that you could do to achieve that goal. Just some quick, so part of the reason that we don't use any, if you want to say visit space, that's going to go to Alaska, go take a 10-day fishing trip to Alaska to really get the sense of the client. Part of the reason we don't judge that is because you can use some decision-making tools later on down the line to kind of winnow through the tasks that you think you might need to achieve. But also, what if it were possible to go to Alaska? What if your client says, yeah, you know what? I think it's really important for you guys to come out here. Why don't we plan a weekend and do this? Or maybe there's a way to visit virtually or get a virtual tour with, the way that you can kind of Skype with a camera on a cell phone these days. Maybe there's a way that you can actually visit without having to take a plane. Maybe there's a way to go and visit some similar areas like the Chesapeake Bay and kind of look at some wildlife issues there and see how they translate. So I think the more out there you can get, the more you can kind of come up with some things that might actually help you, even if they're not achievable. You can find a way to sort of get at the same thing without necessarily having to do that crazy, visit Alaska sort of thing. So then after you come up with all these different things, you go through a couple different rounds, brainstorm different tasks that are going to help you get to your project. You can use some decision-making tools to winnow through. There's something called multi-voting. This is a little less applicable here. But the idea is if you're kind of coming up with one main idea, say your client has left it open for you for what you want to innovate for them, and you just have to generate some ideas. You may want to generate a bunch of ideas through this brainstorming process and then use this multi-voting way of deciding upon them. You can use colored stickers and sort of, you're blue, you're red, you're yellow, and everybody kind of gets a certain amount and they vote on different ideas. You can also just distribute 100 points amongst the ideas, with the idea that you probably don't want to use more than 50% for any one particular idea because it can weight it too heavily. I like this and I don't like this. I think the voting thing sometimes makes people feel as if their idea didn't get selected. If, what if you're the person that came up with all these zany ideas and nobody voted on them because, well, they're not practical. I think sometimes coming to more of a consensus can be more helpful for a team. But if you're really stuck, I think multi-voting can help. The other thing, too, is that what we did in our mentors class is this field trip idea. We voted and then we voted again. We did a couple rounds of voting. So, obviously the crazy ideas, like, although visiting Napa Valley did get into the second round, so they really wanted to do that. But, space and going to Harry Potter Land in Orlando, those didn't make it into the second round. But like whitewater rafting, visiting schools, other schools, business schools around the DC region, going down to the Reagan building for a retreat, those things all made it into the second round. So then you can kind of glom onto the ideas that really help. But those crazy ideas are still there to inspire you to come up with other things and build upon. Some of the things that I like better for making decisions are using decision grids. So we have two different kinds of grids, criteria grid and an impact versus effort grid. And the criteria grid, basically you'd say, all right, what's most important for us to do in order to achieve our project? What are some criteria, how we're going to rate these tasks? Maybe the criteria are, well, we'll talk about the criteria in a second, but you kind of choose your top 5 criteria and you decide on which tasks you would have to winnow out based on those criteria. Then the impact versus effort grid, this gauges items on impact and effort, and I'll give you an example to show you a little bit more about that. So the criteria grid, if we kind of have these tasks up here, so say, let's go back here. These are our tasks, all right? Let's do interview potential students. We'll take that one. So we want to say, okay, what are our different criteria? For our project, we want to make sure it's doable within the time amount that we have allotted. We want to make sure we have the funding to do it. We want to make sure you have access. Okay, can you get access to interviewing prospective students? So you kind of want to set up those criterion up there and then rate each of these tasks on it. So I can say, okay, how does interviewing potential students do on those tasks? Is it something that I can achieve within the time allotted? Is it something that is actually feasible? Do I have the funding to do this? Well, interviewing potential students may be a little tricky because it may take a long time. You don't know how you're going to, you're just going to put something out on Facebook, like, are you thinking about applying to the University of Baltimore? You have to, that would be maybe a little bit more difficult to do versus something like interviewing current students or interviewing members of the admissions team. Those folks are there, you know where they are, you actually can go and interview them more easily than trying to identify potential candidates that might apply to the University of Baltimore and interviewing them. So it's kind of one way. So you'd come up with the criteria, you rate each idea, and then you see which tasks would get the highest totals on the criteria. Usually just a scale of 1, 2, or 3, like it either meets it or it doesn't, is a good way to go. So I know when we rated our criteria in my class, some ideas got 0. They got 0 points. So you can also give 0. You can also weight the different criteria. Say the most important criterion to you is to get the tasks, get the project done within the allotted amount of time. Maybe that's going to get 50% of a vote, and the other 2 criteria that you come up with are going to get 25%. That's another way to do it. This is also a good way to kind of, when you're weighting recommendations, say your client doesn't want you to come up with 3 recommendations. They want you to make the one recommendation that you think is best. You can use these tools to help do that. So the last tool that I kind of like better, especially when you're coming up with this, kind of this recommendation thinking, is, and this is helpful too for tasks. Is this going to be a major improvement? Is it going to be a minor improvement? Is it easy to do or is it difficult to do? So let's take our interviews for improving the University of Baltimore admissions process. Interviewing prospective students. Would that, these are people that are potentially going to be applying. Is this going to be a major improvement or is it going to be a minor improvement? What do you all think? Yeah, it's probably going to be a major improvement. We could actually go out there and interview people who would be applying to the process. So it's going to be up above the line here. Now, is that easy to do or difficult to do? Yeah, so it's going to be up there in that quadrant. Obviously, you want to try to focus on the things that are easy and major. You kind of want to be where that star is. Actually, didn't move those lines properly. Oh, well. You want to kind of stay out of anything that's difficult to do and minor, because why would you waste your time on things that aren't important and hard? If they're easy, if they're difficult and major, I mean, they're probably, you're going to want to try to get them over into this quadrant. And then if they're easy and minor, you may focus on them if you have time, but then you may not. The problem with the easy category, easy and major category, is there's not going to be a whole lot that's going to fit there. Let's go back to these tasks. Reviewing the University of Baltimore website, probably not a huge improvement, probably only a minor improvement, easy to do, but not a major improvement. On here, I think there's almost nothing that would be really easy to do. Some things are easier than others. So this may be a good way, once you come up with this list of tasks, to decide which ones you want to focus on that are going to get you most to your goal. You also may want to think about it in the sense of major improvement, minor improvement. What gets us more to our goal? Which tasks are going to get us closer to achieving what the client wants? So that will help you kind of come up with which tasks you can focus on and which tasks to actually put into your Gantt chart. OK, so we want to move in this direction. I think this is the opposite of the SWOT analysis where you want to move into like that direction. But you want to be up here in this easy major quadrant. All right. So the next step we're going to do is going to be to, once we have that list of tasks, we've winnowed through them. I mean, hopefully you've generated a lot of task ideas when you go through this brainstorming process. If you don't have that many tasks, you may need to go back through a couple rounds because sometimes you may not be getting at some of the things that might be a little bit more of a creative way to get at the thing. And maybe you need to do a list of tasks, go out, do some more background research, learn a little bit more about your client, and then come back and iterate again. Sometimes these processes need to go through several iterations because we want to get to a good list of tasks that we think is really going to help us achieve our project. And that may take a little bit of time. Once you do have that set list of tasks, they've gone through the decision-making process, you're going to build 2 steps, Affinity Diagram, and then a tree diagram. Yeah, so this is the tree. This is the affinity. We're going to start here. The way that I've organized this is I took my statement of work, and I basically said task 1, task 2, task 3, and I stuck these underneath those headings. All right, what's going to be more in task 1 of mapping out that current and ideal state? What's going to be more in task 2 of coming up with, I don't remember what task 2 is, looking for opportunities for improvement, and what's going to be more in task 3 of kind of quantifying those areas for improvement. So task 1, probably spending a day in the office, mapping the current process, surveying the admissions team. Task 2, kind of identifying opportunities for improvement, submitting a doubly application, like going through the process ourselves and seeing what kind of process hang-ups we have, what we like, what we don't like. And then step 3 of kind of measuring cycle time, measuring time spent on process, and maybe looking at some quantifiable data of how many students are applying, how long it takes them to get through the process, survey results, satisfaction, survey the admissions team, seeing what their satisfaction is, where they're most frustrated. Giving some quantifiable numbers is going to be that task, that third task. So scoot on ahead. So you'll design this affinity diagram, and you'll that's why it's great to have Post-its, is because you can put this up on a whiteboard. You can say task 1, task 2, task 3, and then you can arrange them with your team and say, no, I think this task fits better under task 1 than under task 2, or maybe we need to do this task twice. Under both processes, maybe we want to map the current process at the beginning, and we want to map the current process at the end. There's different ways you can get at this. So I kind of did, identify current ideal state, opportunities for improvement, and identify the most substantive opportunities for improvement. This is just sort of a guess, but you guys can come up with what works best for you. Once you have this put together, you've got 3 nice categories, right, for each of the tasks for your statement of work. You've got, the identifying that first state, identifying the second state, identifying the third state. You're going to create a tree diagram, which looks like this. And basically all you're doing is you're going from that crazy brainstorming phase of coming up with tasks, going through a decision-making process to see which ones are best, organizing them into headings, and then ordering them. And there's a reason kind of we're going step by step through this process. It's because once you do all these things, it kind of helps you make a Gantt chart really easily, because setting out to make a Gantt chart can be kind of challenging sometimes. So you have a tree diagram goal statement, comes from your statement of work. You're going to generate the major tree headings. Those are probably going to be your 1, 2, 3 tasks. You break each major heading into greater detail, which is what we did here. This is what we need to do to address this particular task. And then you kind of review it for logical flow and completeness. Have we forgotten something? Is each of these actions necessary to attaining the goal? So 2 sides. One is, are we forgetting anything here? And 2 is, do we need to do this? Is this really necessary? You may look and be like, you know what? We don't really need to interview the current admissions team. They're not the customer. The customer is the student. So we don't care about interviewing them because we really want to focus on what the student wants and the student experience piece of it. I mean, it may be something different for you guys. But that's why we kind of take the tasks and then winnow them down into a tree diagram, is because it's sort of this, putting it out in this visual display allows the entire team to kind of take a look at it. Now here's another reason you can do the Post-it notes. you've got the tasks 1, 2, 3 kind of organized. Now you can move them into something that is where things are dependent. You know, as part of this submitting this dummy application, we need to get some letters of recommendation. We need to submit the application via the online process. You know, it helps you order them. So we have, and you can do these. It's really nice. You can do these in PowerPoint. But I had to change the colors because the way that they had their color set up was totally confusing. So I did the green for task 1, the red for task 2, the blue for task 3. And that way kind of visually helps me keep in line what was together. You can do it any way you want to, but that was just my suggestion. I found that kind of made it a little more easy for me. So identifying the current ideal state, finding opportunities for improvement, best opportunities for improvement. For the Gantt chart, keeping it at this kind of like this level right here is actually going to be the best way to do. You may want to keep a mental note of these things that are smaller, or you may want to elevate these to this level. But basically the Gantt chart kind of allows for 2 levels, unfortunately. I don't know whether a Microsoft project allows for more in-depth levels, but when you do it on Google, I've only found ways to do kind of 2 levels of Gantt charting. So you want to keep it on that level probably. So once you kind of have this tree put together, you've really reviewed it for completeness. And I mean, this may take, you may want to step away from it for a day and say, okay, is there anything else? Is there any sort of burning thing that I really think we need to do that's missing in this? It's not, we're not going to get to our goal unless we do this task or that task. Or I really think this thing is so stupid and we're going to spend so much time doing it and it's not going to help us achieve our goal. So step away from it, come back to it, and then you want to add timelines to help make a Gantt chart. So for this, we want to say, okay, we have I guess at this point you probably have like 11 weeks. We want to split up and say, okay, we think each of these tasks is going to take the same amount of time. We want to say, okay, 3 weeks for this, 3 weeks for that, 3 weeks for this. And this gets back to kind of Guillermo's question of how do I know how long to spend on a certain thing? Quite honestly, like sometimes how long you spend on a certain thing is dictated by how much time you have total. So that's why this helps you kind of think through it. And you may think, okay, the best way to map this current state process is to spend 3 months on it, but you don't have 3 months. So sometimes there's an expression that I always like that the task expands to the amount of time you have to complete it. Now it's not true for everything because some things that are really difficult to do take a lot of time and thinking and that kind of thing. But if you only have 3 weeks to identify the current state, then you better figure out a way to identify the current state in that 3 weeks. My team, when they did this project for Baltimore, I actually had them go back and they had this big long process map on here, and I said, I need you to do like a high level process. So keep in mind that you can do a high level process map, you can do a more detailed process map, you can break it out into different levels. You may only have time for a high level process map, but if you can see one particular piece of the process is taking a really long time, then that's at least more than you knew to begin with. Yeah, question?
So what exactly is the board you're holding? What
is the what?
Is the board you're holding right now?
Oh, this, okay.
What was it used for?
This is the final project. This is the sort of the final storyboard that my students come up with, and I brought it so you guys can take a look at it. This is not their Gantt chart or anything. This is kind of their final result, but I just brought it as a visual for you to see. They kind of include all the elements, though, that I'm talking about. I mean, some people even put their Gantt chart on here, but I think that's sort of only useful inside the team. But this sort of shows kind of their qualitative and this is more their quantitative processes because the qualitative stuff just informed the research. But if you want to take a look at this, and we also have outside the Quest office, we have a ton of boards from our projects every year. I think these are about, I want to see there's like 80, 90 bucks to make over at Staples, and they're, Staples, not Staples, Kinko's. Kinko's does these for us. And they're a pretty good way to kind of visualize all the information and show what you did to give a little background about your client, your opportunity statement, and then talk about your methodology and the process that you used. So,
just a follow-up. So
yeah.
This is your assumption, like the institution.
This actually, well, we have a conference that we present these at. I think you guys do too. Yeah.
So the Quest program is a little different, and this is like a standardized deliverable.
Yeah. Right.
Whereas with your team, it'll depend on the project.
Yeah.
Report or a slide deck or whatnot.
Yeah. This is one of the, they do a final report, and this is one of the deliverables. So.
Throughout the development of the scoping process,
Mm-hmm.
we're not providing reports or organizational idea charts to institutions. Are we? Is that what you're supposed to do?
That you do, that you provide.
That we do this sort of thing and
that's okay. So the question is if you, I'm sorry, I'm repeating the question so that folks at home can hear it. The question is, should you share this with your client? I would say no.
Okay, good.
Yeah. This is I walk through the process because, and you may look at the process and be like, well, that post-it thing is stupid. We're not doing that. But you're going to use bits and pieces of this process that fits your team and fits your project. What you're going to show them is, well, I'll pull it up on screen, but it's the Gantt chart probably. And that's just to show them, I mean, people like to see Gantt charts because it helps them get a sense of when things are going to be accomplished. And if they have a particular deadline that they want you to meet, and they say, this is coming a week too early for us, why don't you get it to us the following week, and then we'll be able to present at this conference or get you some feedback on it, or everyone's going to be out of town this week. So that's the only thing that you'll probably share with the client out of everything that we've talked about in these 2 sessions is a statement of work and the Gantt chart. All of the rest of the stuff is internal processes, just tools to help your team. Okay, so we're here. So the amount of sorry, go ahead.
So how is that different from doing a PowerPoint presentation or just another?
This? Yeah. This is kind of like a mini version of their PowerPoint presentation. This is actually a PowerPoint slide that they put together. So they kind of consolidate a lot of their information onto this from the macro level PowerPoint. The idea is that we have a conference that the students present at, and there's a whole session of storyboarding because the way that our conference works, we don't have enough time for everyone to see all of the student presentations. So we kind of do it in parallel sessions, but this way everyone can walk around and get a nice visual. And then sometimes the clients request, they're like, we want one of those, can you make another one for us? So sometimes it's a way for them to sort of visualize the information. And we talk a lot about visual display of information in the class. We use Say It with Charts, which is a book I really highly recommend, especially I know a lot of consultants use it. It's called Say It with Charts. It's got a lot of great graphics and ways to express things and understanding how the visuals of your message also contribute to how you're saying your message. So that's a good thing to think about both for a PowerPoint presentation or a poster like this, or even visuals within a document that you're coming up with for your client. So. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's all this is. It's a poster session tool. So our students do a poster session essentially when you go to conferences. Because you never know. You may end up publishing something with your client, the part of your report. You may end up going and presenting some form that they have. Depending on how well your project does. I mean, sometimes you get these opportunities to go and present in other forums, and it may be worth it to come up with something like this if you're going to be at a forum where you want to have a quick, kind of a quick explanation for what you did. So you all are welcome to look at this, and then I'll also point you in the direction of where my office is, because basically it's on the 3rd floor where the LBPP department is. If you go up there, you walk down our hall, you can't miss it. All the posters are there, and it's a lot of different ways to kind of show information visually. We spend a lot of time. Yeah, sure.
You talked about doing a high level, I guess.
Yeah.
So how does that help when you do a project? Because you will really have to go into the details.
Mm-hmm.
So how does things on a high level?
I think it depends on how much time you have and how much time you need to spend. If the map during the process map, so this is a tree. Basically, this is was actually part of their project. They had 13 weeks total. The reason that they did a high-level tree, or the reason that you might do a high-level tree, is you do a high-level process map. You can figure out maybe where you want to focus your attentions on if you have a limited amount of time. So they discovered that when they were doing, I think it was a residency application, they did this high-level process and they kind of timed it out how much time each of these steps was taking, and they realized that when the application was spending actually the most time with the program directors. So that offered the most opportunity for them to cut back the amount of time out of the entire admissions process was here. So, I mean, they ended up focusing on a lot of different pieces of the process. But if you were kind of in an accelerated timeline, you might say, you know what, let's just focus on this piece of the process because that's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. So that's, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
We first do a high level and then figure out which is the task that's most important, but that's not going to be much time.
It really depends on your project. But I think that's what you want to do first is you kind of want to come up with this idea and figure out the timeline for each of the tasks. and then figure out if that timeline makes sense. If you want to survey 500 people, how are we doing on time? Okay. I just want to make sure it wasn't cutting into somebody else's class. If you realize you want to survey 500 people and you're only giving yourself a week, or you only have 2 weeks to do it, then that's a point when you need to take a step back and say, you know what, I don't think we're going to be able to do this. Is there another way we can get at this information? So that's the reason of matching these tasks to timeline. I mean, whether or not you want to do a high-level process map and that's how you want to deal with mapping the current state, or you want to tell your client, look, you know, we thought we could do all of these things, but actually we can only map the process, you know, current state, because we only have X amount of time. That's why sometimes this talking about the project management plan plays a role in creating your statement of work and why these things are kind of best done together. So it's actually good that you're kind of seeing both of these things before coming up with your formal statement of work. Our students who started, I guess they started like 2 weeks ahead of you, they're just coming up with their statements of work for their clients this week. So it does take a couple of weeks of iterating, figuring out how much time you have for certain things. So that's the idea, and you may want to say, okay, now that we see the timeline, we can't do this, that, and the other thing task, but we still need to know this information, so what are some other ways we can do it? I think sometimes doing some background research, using what's out there in the literature and using that as a proxy for what's going on in your particular project might be helpful. If it's a sort of benchmarking thing and you realize you definitely don't have the time to do that because that's very time consuming, offering your client an alternative of saying, well, we're going to survey the current research that's out there available publicly and use that information as a proxy. This is sort of going to get at, for you, where you have to spend your time and what's the most valuable to spend your time on. So this is the timeline, you know, and the other thing too is you kind of have to work backwards because, you know, if this survey right here is going to take 3 weeks and it's really a key piece of what you're doing, then that's going to impact how much this time is going to take, and then that's going to impact the timeline of your entire project. So working backwards and thinking about how much these smaller tasks are going to take, and you may realize, gee, we don't have enough time, you know, or we have to crunch this, and so kind of adjusting back and forth is going to be the way to start. But I usually start with these tasks when I'm coming up with my timeline. Okay, so, oh good, we have time for questions. Okay. So let's see if I'll have to sit here and do this. This link is available for you all on the PowerPoint slide, so you can kind of click through and play around with it. If you want to even copy the template, you're welcome to do that. But basically, Google Docs has a function where you can insert a chart. This is the Gantt chart. Has anyone made Gantt charts before?
What does Gantt stand for?
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, it's I think it's a guy's name.
The first consult.
Yeah. And it's 2 T's, not 2 N's. Sometimes my students write 2 N's instead of 2 T's. I think I've written 2 N's before. So this is what it looks like. And we'll play around with it a little bit to show you kind of how it works. But the idea is that, you know, these are my 3 tasks, these white bars right here. Identify current ideal state, find opportunities for improvement, find best opportunities for improvement. Okay, that was kind of redundant, but basically this is my qualitative phase, finding opportunities. Where are the opportunities? And then this is my quantitative. I'm going to measure these and see which one is going to give my client the most bang for his buck or her buck. And you see too how this line is determined by how long these particular tasks take. And you know, all of your tasks may not be equal. You know, maybe when we want to spend less time identifying the current state and more time finding opportunities for improvement. Also, I have these overlapping because I need to identify the current state, but then as I'm going over the current state, these need to be concurrent. So some of your tasks may be happening at the same time. You may staff out project team members to work on different things at different times so you can get more done and then come back together with the data and review it together. Okay, so what we're going to do is go over how to make this. Basically, you want to first open up a spreadsheet in Google Docs, and then you're going to set up the columns this way. You're going to give each task an ID. I don't remember what WBS stands for. It's like work breakdown something? Yeah, work breakout structure, okay. The work breakout structure, WBS, all this is this basically gives you, this creates this. So this identify current state is task number 1. So that actually comes from my statement of work, right? And then these are all the little mini tasks that go along with it, these 1.01, 1.02. The, let's go here. So this basically is going to be my 1 You can also do it this way. You can have this be your 1 if you just want to have like one big one. But I like to break it out in the subtasks. So this will be your 1. If you had some subtasks here, those would be your 1.01, 1.02, and so on, 2, 3, etc. So then you want to have the name of the task. That's just basically what it is. Your start date, your finish date. And these, again, are estimates. But this is where you start to get that timeline. So that's why when we did this and we built in our timeline, you can actually match it up with the calendar. And then you may want to put on here, oops, oh, I forgot I can't edit this. You may want to add down here at the column 11, and this will be just a 4, its own kind of thing, and we'll say this is Thanksgiving break, and you'll put Thanksgiving break on there. So it's in your Gantt chart. And what's nice about that is that your client is not at all on an academic calendar. You are. So you may want to just let them know, hey, here's when we have exams. We're not going to be able to schedule a meeting this week. These can be also varying levels of detail. I know that when some of the tasks on there, like you may say, we need to have weekly staff updates, or we may want to give our clients a consulting matrix of what we've done this week, what we plan to do next week, what action items are, what resources we need from you. You may want to give that update once a week, and you may want to build those in every single week. That way, if you have to skip a week because of Thanksgiving, it's already on there and the client knows to expect it. I know when I've had to schedule, I manage a grant writing process for academics from 3 different colleges. It was very challenging because we're doing a conference call and people had different calendars and people were going to be away. So when on my Gantt chart, the bi-weekly meeting every 2 weeks was on that chart so that people knew it was there and people kind of knew to expect that. And that really actually helped drive the entire process. Sometimes making sure that people can just get in the same room, even virtually via Skype or conference call, is in and of itself a huge accomplishment of getting things done. And trying to keep those meetings to an hour to make them really productive, but also not take up too much of any one person's time. So you may want to put those on there. You may want to put, your exams, Thanksgiving, the final date. You definitely want to make sure that's on there. So that's the name. These are your tasks, but it can also be meetings. It can also be breaks that you may have to take. Start date, finish date, percent complete. Honestly, I never use this, but if you want to use it, you can say, we've mapped half the current process. That's 50% done. I can't edit this. I keep forgetting that. And that maybe can just give, if someone is tasked on this, like say, Kartik, who's working with Table for 2, he is supposed to be mapping the current process of how they come up with the restaurant partners. He wants to let the rest of the team know, hey, I'm 50% done with this. I'm almost there. You may want to use it that way. Hopefully, you're communicating some of that in team meetings. But if you're using this as a communication tool as well as a project management tool, that may be helpful. And then person responsible. Again, if you have simultaneous tasks and different people are responsible for different things, on my teams, the students are all multidisciplinary. So, we may have the engineer want to go out there and conduct an energy analysis of something on the factory floor, and that engineer is solely responsible for that. But the business person is the one that's supposed to dig up the financial records for it. Sometimes they trade roles because they want to get experience in different things. But if there's one particular skill that someone on the team has that no one else does, and they're responsible for it, you may want to make a note of that. Sometimes people are going to work and maybe the entire team has to be at the team meetings. Maybe there's something that the entire team is going to work on, an interview, something that's really time consuming. So putting up a person responsible is really helpful. Then, let's see. What you're going to do is, okay, I may need to actually log into this. All right, we'll just go to Google Docs. The Gantt chart through Google Docs is actually provided through ViewPath. You can also go to their website to create this, but I like the kind of integration of the Google Docs. So here's mine. This is what it's going to look like if you're actually working on it. So apparently I can't. Well, let's do a new one because I can't apparently map in a new. Sorry about that. So say you set up all your tasks. You want to do, we'll just copy these. Okay, that didn't work. So we have ID, work breakdown, task, start date, finish date, percent complete, and person responsible. All right. And we don't have anything populated in here yet. What you're going to do next is you're going to go to Insert. Apparently. Gadget. If you go down to Charts, Gantt chart. So you can add a spreadsheet. You're going to give the range for it. So you want it to be the entire sheet. Okay. And then you're going to match up these columns. Sometimes it does it for you, but I've had trouble like making it do it for me sometimes. So the name column, oh, we want to call this name, sorry. The name column is going to be column D. Start column will be column E. Finish column F. Go down the line. Work breakdown structure is C. Predecessor column, oh, we forgot a predecessor. Talk about this. We'll make that A. No, not H, A. Unique ID, and that's the ID column, so that's B. Okay. It's working, but at the end of the day, it's basically going to look like this. Okay, never mind. It's going to look like this. Sometimes the browser may give you a little trouble with the Gantt chart. I've had the best luck on Firefox. It doesn't seem to work in Chrome, and it doesn't seem to work in Internet Explorer. Chrome, sometimes it works, but Internet Explorer is not that great for this. So this basically gives you this visual that's really helpful as far as coming up with your Gantt chart. You can move this to its own sheet. You can print it out, or you can just keep it a living document by keeping it only online. So let's just do one more thing. Now this, let's see. Another thing that you may want to add on here, it's not necessary, but is a predecessor column. So once you've gotten all of your tasks done, you've gotten, this is all for task 1, this is all for task 2, this is all for task 3. You have the start date and the finish date for all of them. You've assigned a person responsible for each of them. You can set a predecessor. So say, getting 3 letters of recommendation, we have to do that before we can get submit the dummy application. So you want to say, okay, for submitting the dummy application, we're going to say that task 9 is going to be the predecessor. So you may want to actually order that differently on the sheet. You may want to say task 2, we can't find opportunities for improvement until we actually identify the current state. So we want to say task 2 is wholly dependent on task 1. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you little arrows. It's going to point and say, task 2, it'll have an arrow going back up to the end of task 1. And that way you know that these things are linked. The benefit to this is that we're talking about the task structure when things kind of, how much time do things take? If I have to add an extra week to this particular task, how is it going to impact everything else? This gives you sort of a visual thing. You're like, well, task 1 or task 2 is the huge part of this whole project. If task 1, goes on longer, then we're going to run out of time to complete task 2. So it helps keep everybody on track, and then okay, maybe we have to edit this, maybe we have to cut this little task out because it's not so important. But it gives you an idea of how one thing kind of impacts everything else. And that, I think, is the real kind of help that a Gantt chart offers. A lot of our students, when they first see them, they're kind of like, oh, it seems like such a pain, because they are a little bit arduous to put together. But I think the benefit of them is it helps you kind of run your project more smoothly from there on out. The more work you kind of put together now of really crafting a great statement of work that you and your client agree on, coming up with those tasks that you think are really helpful, reviewing over the tasks when you put them in the tree chart and say, okay, what's missing? What's really not that useful to us? What's going to take too much time? What do we need to edit, or what do we need to get at in a different way? The more time you spend thinking about that now and then crafting this Gantt chart that's kind of like helpful for moving the process forward, the less time you're going to have to spend backtracking. If you have scope creep later on, you have a statement of work you can refer to. If your interview process ends up taking 3 weeks instead of 1, well, you know how that's going to impact everything else. So it allows you to sort of be a little more organized and attack it with the process. The other thing too is this is a great communication tool with your client. It shows that you're organized. you've thought about it. If they don't agree with the timeline, if they want a different timeline, you can talk about it because there's something visual there rather than just saying, well, we want to get it done by this date and kind of looking at a calendar. This really maps out why a particular piece of the process is going to take so long. They may say, you know what, I don't want you to interview current students anymore because that's going to take too much time. I mean, see how much time that is on there. You know, I want you to really focus on just the admissions team. Or I really want you to focus on the student piece and not the admissions team. It gives kind of a visual for everyone involved in the project to agree upon or disagree upon and kind of get to a better place. So I think that's about all the time that I have. I put on here a few more tools. Okay, so that's here. That have there are other ways to do Gantt charts, but really I think the view path in the Google Docs is probably the best way to go because it's something that you can share. But you may want to check these out if you don't like the view path or you find it hard to use. Maybe do better. And like I said, you're always welcome to come by my office, take a look at all of our storyboards that we have. May just give you an idea of some of the methodologies that students have used in the past. I also have office hours if you want to come by and talk about your project in more detail, or you want to have some questions. And I'll take a few questions right now if you have any for me. I'm happy to go back to the Gantt chart. I know it's a big piece and it's like a lot of different moving parts, but you will have access to see mine and to play around with it a little bit. Yes?
So once you plug in the data,
Uh-huh.
like the tasks and so on.
Yeah.
So, and if we go to the Google Doc Gantt chart,
Mhm.
it should automatically.
It should populate. You may want to, sometimes the way that it populates depending on the timeline of your project, you may want to go in and out right here. See, these are like zoom tools. So you can like zoom in, zoom out, you can move forward, you can move backwards. So I always like to zoom out enough so that I can see the entire project all at once, but you may want to zoom in on a particular piece. If you're having issues, you can shoot me an email and I'll see if I can help you because I've had a variety of different kind of buggy issues. It's not perfect, and I may be able to help you kind of figure out how to get there. Making sure that that when you set up the gadget, all of the names are matched up with what it's supposed to be called, and making sure that the entire sheet is highlighted for when is for input into the gadget. Those are some of the issues. And then changing around browsers has always helped me. It may work in one browser one day and not in the other. It's a little weird how it works, but it does work, and I do think that it's really, really helpful. So, any other questions about this? Yeah.
When do you think is a good time to give this to your client? Like after the initial meeting?
I think ideally, I would either do it closely. We have our students submit their statement of work, their final scope, and their action plan all in one piece. Because that way you can sit down and when you're discussing the statement of work, you also have a timeline that goes along with it to say, you know what, task one, if you want to add something to task one, this is how it's going to impact the rest of the plan. So you actually have a visual there to discuss how it's going to make an impact on everything else. If you can't do it at the same time as statement of work, you want to discuss the statement of work before you come up with your Gantt chart. You may, a week after, but I would submit them pretty close to one another because they are tied together.
The scope document includes the timeline that you'll have to
Yeah.
fill out. It's basically just another version of a Gantt chart, but line items. With
Yeah.
team member responsibility and team to complete all that stuff.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and you can do these. I mean, the thing is this is sort of, if you don't like the technological version, I mean, I have done Gantt charts on a whiteboard and taken a picture with my phone. You know what I mean? And emailed that out to everyone. Sometimes that simple, low-tech way works really well, but it's more the thought process that's important of thinking about how long each task takes and how they impact one another. So I think that's really the important piece of the Gantt chart. Any other questions? Well, thanks, y'all. You're a great audience.